The series begins with a fashion model named Harriet Manners talking about herself. She says that she used to dream of a job far from the spotlight and cameras. Despite her dream, she entered the world of fashion and modeling, which made her the center of attention. She no longer enjoys any privacy as cameras follow her everywhere she goes. When we flash back to Harriet's past, to learn how she entered the fashion world, we see her going to her school. We notice that she is an introverted person who does not know how to handle gatherings well. This is to the extent that she trips and falls to the ground without any apparent reason. Her classmates laugh at her and call her geek or the nerd. Harriet is then compelled to look up the meaning of the nickname that haunts her everywhere. She finds its meaning in the dictionary as someone obsessed who cannot build strong social relationships, does not care about their appearance, and wears whatever clothes come to hand. Harriet talks about her school and says that she attends 5 days a week, trying to integrate with her classmates, but failing to do so, unlike her classmate Toby. Therefore, she only has one close friend named Nat. Later, Harriet goes to the office of the principal, Julian Venice, who is very happy with the work she is doing in the fashion industry. He tells her he is proud of her and announces to the students over the school's microphone that Harriet Manners will represent the school at London Fashion Week. When Harriet goes home to prepare and pack her bags, her stepmother Annabelle comes in, opens the curtains, and sees Toby standing in the street in front of their house. She asks Harriet why he is standing there, and Harriet explains that she is used to seeing him like that all day. She clarifies that he is rehearsing for the play he will enter in the talent competition. Indeed, Toby is standing in the street rehearsing a play. When he sees Nat, he invites her to be a guest star in one of his plays. He tells him she is in a hurry and goes inside to Harriet, her, and heading to the bus. Toby rides his scooter and heads to the bus as well. There, Lexi, who is walking with her friend Liv, sees him. She asks him about his strange girlfriend. When Toby realizes she means Harriet, he tells her that Harriet is on her way and explains that she is misunderstanding because there is no romantic relationship between him and Harriet. At that moment, Nat and Harriet are running to catch the bus. When Nat notices that Harriet cannot run, she goes ahead and informs the teacher responsible for the trip that Harriet is on her way. When Harriet arrives, she is very tired from running and falls between the seats on the bus floor. Of course, as soon as Lexi sees her, she takes out her phone and starts recording. Her friends Liv and Ollie are with her, laughing at Harriet, until Nat extends her hand to help her up from the floor. However, Harriet forgets her bag, which Liv, Lexi's friend, takes and gives to Ollie. At the same time, Nat tells Harriet that she dreams of becoming a model and says that life is full of luck and coincidences, to the point where some models were discovered by chance. In the middle of this dream, Toby interrupts and shocks them when he spills juice from his bag on them. The trip supervisor sees them and asks them to go to the lost found section to look for something to wear. Of course, the clothes they find do not please Nat, who dreams of becoming a fashion model. Toby tries to apologize to them again, but Nat remains upset. She tells Harriet that they have already arrived at the museum where Fashion Week will be held. She feels embarrassed to talk to any fashion agents in the clothes she is wearing. At this moment, Ollie returns Harriet's bag to her, but not before writing obsessed on it. Harriet tries to add a letter to the word to give it a different meaning. Inside the museum, Nat leaves her friend Harriet and goes to the bathroom. By chance, Harriet sees a model named Nick Park. They exchange glances, and then she sees a large picture of him on the stairs with the date of his upcoming show. When Nick Park disappears to prepare for his show, he is accompanied by someone named Wilbur, checks on him and gets him ready for the show. Wilbur tells him that he and his partner Betty will go out to scout models for Infinity, the company they work for. While Harriet wants to stay away from the spotlight, Wilbur notices her and is very impressed. He tells Betty that she would be a perfect model for their company. However, when they approach her, she gets lost. They cannot find her. At that moment, the fashion show begins and captivates everyone except Harry, who is standing in front of a mannequin wearing a strange cap. He takes it off the mannequin's head, puts it on, takes a picture with it. Meanwhile, Nat sees Wilbur and goes to introduce herself to him. He tells her she is beautiful, sweet, and impressive, but he is looking for a completely different style than hers. She leaves him and goes to sit on the museum stairs alone, crying. Harriet is still wearing the strange cap when Judd, the CEO of Infinity Fashion and Style, sees her and scolds her for using something she was not allowed to use. Harriet gets flustered and falls to the ground. At that moment, Lexi takes out her phone and records the incident, posting it on social media. Wilbur and Betty take Harriet backstage and talk to her, but she misunderstands them and thinks she is in trouble and will be arrested. She calls her father, Richard Manners, and leaves him a voicemail explaining that she is in trouble and asking him to come and bail her out of jail. But Wilbur and Betty tell her they just want to take her picture. When Wilbur sees the photo, he tells Betty that they have discovered a model who will make a huge impact. However, when Harriet hears this, she gets anxious and says that modeling is Nat's dream, not hers. She tells Wilbur that she will go out and bring Nat to her. Wilbur tells her that he wants her, not Nat. But despite his words, she goes out to look for Nat anyway. By chance, she meets Nick and greets him, but he leaves her and quickly returns to his work. She continues on her way and finds Nat, taking her back to the bus. As soon as Harriet wakes up and opens the magazine to Nick Park's photos, she is very happy. She takes the magazine with her to the kitchen to have breakfast, looking at Nick's pictures while she prepares her meal. Seeing Harriet smiling, Annabelle, her stepmother, approaches and asks her the reason for her smile. Harriet says she was thinking about something related to chemistry. She searches for Nick Park's name on the internet, and when she sees his pictures, she gets excited to learn more about him. However, Annabelle takes the laptop from her for her work. Meanwhile, in London, we see Yugi Lee, one of the most important fashion designers in London, standing in front of a dress named Nirvana. Her assistant asks if she still stands by her statement about the model who will present it. Yugi Lee removes the picture of the model, Bobby, from the dress and tells her assistant that they need a new model. The assistant mentions that the show is approaching and choosing a new model will be very difficult. However, Yugi Lee insists on her decision and asks him to select a model who represents the essence of her company. At the same time, Harriet is at home. When Nat sends her the viral video of her on the internet, she gets anxious and wishes she lived in an earthquake zone so that a strong quake would swallow her up. Her father prepares her lunchbox, which she takes and puts in her bag. Before leaving the house, she asks Annabelle how to remove a video of herself from the internet. Annabelle asks if someone is blackmailing her, but Harriet says the matter is simpler than that. Annabelle advises her to file an online report. Meanwhile, when Nick Park wakes up, his colleague Bobby comes to him. They make a short video together and post it on social media. Bobby tells him that their audience needs to see a story, even if it's a fake love story. After recording and posting the video, she leaves him and walks away. At school, Nat tells Harriet that the video will not be deleted from the internet with just one report. She needs to have all her friends report it as well. Suddenly, Ollie blocks their path and tries to mock Harriet and the guitar she is carrying. Meanwhile, Lexi asks her friends to repost Harriet's video. At Infinity, Wilbur is with Betty. Their boss, Judy, tells them that Yugi Lee has decided to look for a new model for the new dress she designed and asks them to find a new girl they can rely on. After Judy leaves, Betty tells Wilbur that she found the address of Harriet's school and that she also sent her father a message, but he hasn't responded yet. Wilbur asks her to go to the school themselves. At school, Wilbur asks Sally, the receptionist, for Harriet Manor's file, but she refuses until the principal, Julian, arrives. He learns that Wilbur works in fashion and modeling and asks Sally to give him what he wants. Then he takes Wilbur and Betty to his office. Julian calls Harriet on the school's intercom and asks her to come to his office. However, she is busy looking up Nick Park and has her headphones on, so she does not hear the principal. Her friend Nat comes and tells her that the principal wants to see her. Harriet gets scared and thinks she will be expelled because of the viral video. Nat reassures her and says she will go with her. In the principal's office, Wilbur offers Harriet a job at Infinity Fashion. She refuses, saying that Nat is better than her. Wilbur suggests that Nat can come along. They can try her out too. Harriet agrees at first, thinking she has fulfilled her friend Nat's dream. However, she gets scared and changes her mind after a few seconds, saying she doesn't want to be in the spotlight. She tells Wilbur that she won't go with him. Wilbur writes down his phone number and asks her to call him if she changes her mind. In drama class, the teacher is busy explaining Ham. At that moment, Harriet gets a notification that the video Lexi posted of her has been deleted. She gets very excited, so the teacher asks her a question about what he is explaining and asks Lexi the same question. Harriet gives a perfect answer that the teacher praises, and her classmate Toby, who loves drama, claps for her. Lexi, however, attacks Harriet after the teacher leaves, accusing her of giving smart answers to make her look dumb in front of everyone. Lexi stands in front of the class and asks who hates Harriet Manners, asking them to raise their hands. Harriet leaves the classroom in tears. Toby follows her and tries to comfort her, but she leaves him and sits among the trees, crying alone. When she returns home, she tells herself that nothing will change unless she takes action, becomes more positive. She calls her friend Nat and tells her that she has decided to participate in Fashion Week with Infinity. At Infinity, Judd is watching the models to choose one for Yugi Lee's dress. Wilbur asks her to look at Harriet's photos and tells her that she is a new, unknown face who could make a huge impact if she joins them for Fashion Week. Judd starts to seriously consider her. At the same time, Harriet is with her father, Richard, and Annabelle in front of the Infinity headquarters. Nat is with them and says she will go ahead and enter the company. After Nat leaves, Nick Park approaches Harriet and introduces himself for the second time. She is very impressed by him, but tells herself that he is interested in his colleague, Bobby. She asks him to teach her how to be a model and how to strike distinctive poses for photos. He decides to help her. When he explains how to be captivating in pictures, she realizes she is starting to like him. They enter the company together, and he takes off her coat in front of everyone. Richard is happy to see her, but Annabelle comments that the guy with her is just a model. Wilbur feels relieved because Harriet is starting to integrate integrate and make friends within the company. When Wilbur talks about the opportunity Harriet might have if she succeeds with them, saying that her life will change 180 degrees, but she will need to dedicate a significant amount of her time to them, Annabelle rejects the idea. She says that Harriet is still studying and needs to focus on her education. Richard tries to explain that their daughter can balance studying and working as a model. Harriet also tells Annabelle that she can manage both modeling and studying, but Annabelle insists that the fashion industry is not suitable for her because she is sensitive and won't be able to handle the constant photography and cameras. Harriet asks her friend Nat how she can find a way to convince Annabelle to let her work with Infinity. Nat assures her that they will think together and find a way. Meanwhile, Bobby goes to Nick to take a picture with him and post it on social media as they do every day. He surprises her by saying that he doesn't want to continue their fake relationship because he is tired of it and wants to live a real life, not a fake one. Bobby tells him that she doesn't love him either because he is not the kind of man she likes, but their fake relationship is necessary for work. She gets close to it, takes a picture, and posts it against his will. She takes advantage of her father's birthday party at home and prepares a speech with Nat's help. In the speech, she talks about multitasking by diligent individuals who decide to be important in life. Nat shows pictures of famous people who manage to do more than one task at a time and talks about them with enthusiasm. When she finishes her speech, Annabelle scolds her, but Harriet tells her that she must let her become a model because it will change her life. She promises that she won't neglect her studies and will continue to excel. Annabelle responds that what she did was rude because she took advantage of her father's birthday party and distracted everyone from celebrating him. While Richard and Annabelle are busy with the cake and candles, Nat asks Harriet if she has given up on Fashion Week. Harriet replies that she will attend. They need to plan it well. Indeed, Harriet and Nat secretly attend training sessions that will prepare them for work at Infinity. They skip school without their parents knowing. When they arrive, they join the other girls in training. Wilbur tells them they will compete with each other to determine who will represent the company in the end. He informs them that Judd Payton herself will be training them. At that moment, Judd appears and tells them they are looking for the hidden gem among them to represent their company. This means they will be thoroughly evaluated and one will be chosen to join the professional models at the company. As the competition begins, Judd tells Wilbur that she can't believe the predicament Yugi Lee has put them in. She says they need to find a suitable model for Yugi Lee's dress by the end of the day. If they fail to provide a model from their ranks, Yugi Lee might go to another company, costing them a lot of money. Wilbur decides to make things more challenging for the girls to better evaluate them. He tells them he wants them to embody the client's desired image and asks them to express kindness, mystery, gentleness, and fierceness through their body language. He emphasizes that a professional model must master all of these. When Wilbur goes to Judd's office, he finds that she has selected a group of girls. Upon seeing them, he smiles and tells her that they all have classic beauty. Judd replies that classic beauty is the hallmark of their brand. He reminds her that they are dealing with Yugi Lee, whose vision is always unconventional. When Wilbur returns to the girls, he makes them wear garbage bags and tells them that a professional model can make a garbage bag look like a royal gown. He asks them to show him how they can achieve that. After 6 girls remain in the competition, Judd puts them in high heels and asks them to show her their walk. The only one who struggles to walk in high heels is Harriet. Seeing this, Wilbur tries to encourage her to continue in the competition because he believes in her the most. He asks her to imagine herself as a famous model and a star that everyone envies for her success. At 1 o'clock, Wilbur goes to Judd's office and tells her that there is only 1 hour left until Yugi Lee's team arrives. Judd tells him that she has already chosen the model she will work with, gives him the photos of the eliminated girls to send them away. When he sees Harriet's photo among them, he defends her. Judd says that Harriet was the only girl who couldn't walk in high heels. Wilbur insists that Harriet has learned to walk in heels and asks Judd to come down and see her. When Judd sees Harriet, she tells Wilbur that Yugi Lee's team won't be convinced by her. Wilbur argues that Harriet is exactly what Yugi Lee requested. She has something special that sets her apart from the other girls. He is confident that she will succeed. At that moment, Nick Park appears and tells Wilbur that Harriet has something unique compared to the other models. Wilbur is pleased to hear that someone else shares his thoughts. When Nick stands with Harriet, he gives her feedback on her performance and asks her to look a certain way when facing the camera. Later, Nat asks Harriet about Nick. Harriet tells her that he is just a friend, that there is nothing beyond friendship between them. She assures Nat that she doesn't have feelings for him as she thought. At exactly 2 o'clock, Wilbur is surprised to see Yugi Lee herself in front of him. He tells her that he was expecting her team, not her personally. She responds that she wouldn't trust anyone else with her work and asks him to show her all the girls in training, not just the ones he selected. After Harriet finishes her photo shoot, she tells Nat that she can't believe they skipped school without their parents knowing. Nat replies that what they are doing is surely better than a biology class. Nick then asks Harriet for her phone number, which she happily gives him, feeling she is getting closer to him day by day. At this moment, Wilbur calls the girls to stand in front of Yugi Lee. He tells them that she will choose one of them to become a professional model. When Yugi Lee appears, they all become nervous and await her decision. However, she doesn't address them directly. Instead, she whispers in Judd's ear and walks away. Wilbur stands in front of each girl and informs her of the decision. He tells Nat that she is beautiful, but luck wasn't on her side this time, so she leaves immediately. She believes that Harriet will also be rejected, but that is not what happens. Harriet gets accepted and goes after Nat to console her. She doesn't know how to tell her that she got accepted and will become a model, even though it was Nat's dream since she was a child. In the end, Harriet cannot bring herself to tell her, thinks to herself that she didn't lie to her, but is waiting for the right moment to tell her. When Harriet returns home, her father, Richard, asks if her day at school was good. She tells him it was, but he asks her not to lie and to tell him the truth. She immediately confesses that she skipped school, went to the modeling auditions, and succeeded. Richard celebrates with her and tells her that he knows they will travel to Canada. Harriet then travels to Canada with her father, Richard. There, Wilbur welcomes them and tells her that she has many tasks ahead, will become a famous star in the fashion world. When Harriet sees the dress she will wear, she is amazed by its beauty, tells herself it's the first time she has fallen in love with a dress. She starts preparing to wear it. Wilbur welcomes Nick Park and comments on his punctuality. When Wilbur notices Bobby signaling to Nick, he alerts him to go to her. Nick reluctantly goes to Bobby, who asks his opinion on the dress she is wearing. She says she doesn't like it because it makes her look like a sunflower. At that moment, Harriet appears, ready to wear her dress. She passes by Nick and Bobby, greets them, and tells Bobby she recognizes her from social media. Bobby then leaves to get her photo taken in the dress she dislikes, leaving Nick alone with Harriet. Both of them are flustered and unsure of what to say to each other, so they ask each other the same questions and talk about the weather and nature in Canada. Suddenly, Yugi Lee appears, and Nick goes to greet her with a kiss on the cheek. Innocently, Harriet mimics him. Yugi Lee deliberately welcomes Nick and calls him her nephew, which surprises Harriet. Harriet tries to overcome her nervousness by talking a lot, telling Yugi Lee that she has read a lot about her online, despite meeting her only twice, knows a great deal about her. Wilbur intervenes, telling Yugi Lee that she asked him to find someone with no experience, and he did exactly what she asked. Yugi Lee remarks that the lack of experience is very evident and takes Harriet to sit with her. Afterward, Yugi Lee tells her that she is sweet and enjoyable to meet. Harriet gets nervous, thinks Yugi Lee is mocking her, saying to both her and Nick that it looks like she'll be leaving Canada, going back home soon. However, Wilbur reassures her and explains that Yugi Lee actually likes her and is expressing it. Harriet finds herself in a big dilemma, cannot get out of it. When her father, Richard, notices her anxiety and asks her about it, she tells him that she hasn't yet told her friend Nat that she got accepted into Infinity Fashion. He replies that he hasn't told Annabelle that he traveled to Canada with her either, and decides to leave Annabelle a voice message explaining that he is spending the weekend in Canada. After he finishes recording the message, he gets a FaceTime call from Dino, his boss, who says that Richard requested sick leave to work from home but has deceived him and traveled to Canada. Dino points out the French sign in the background as proof and informs Richard that he is fired. Meanwhile, Nick is with Bobby and cannot get rid of her or the pictures she keeps taking. She takes a photo for her followers and tells them she is with her boyfriend in Ottawa, Canada. When Harriet sees them, she joins and tells them she wants to hang out with them. They go to see a giant spider sculpture together, and afterward, Bobby leaves them alone. Harriet is surprised when Nick starts flirting with her. Back at the hotel, Harriet asks her father, Richard, how to distinguish between flirting and friendly compliments. He tells her she is asking the wrong person because he didn't realize Annabelle was flirting with him until they had gone out 3 times. However, he ultimately tells her that friendship is the best start to romantic relationships. During Harriet's first runway show, Bobby deliberately walks right in front of her to trip her up. Harriet falls in front of the audience, but they sympathize with her, and she manages to get up and finish the show holding her shoe in her hand. After leaving the stage, Harriet thinks Yugi Lee will fire her. She is surprised when Wilbur tells her that she will participate in a new show, because the audience loved her spontaneity and sympathized with her when she fell. The next morning, the photo sessions for the models presenting Yugi Lee's collection continue, and Yugi Lee watches them closely with great interest. At that moment, the newspapers arrive. When she opens them, she finds that all the news is about Harriet, the new model. Yugi Lee tells Wilbur Wilbur that Harriet has become very famous and one of their top models. He responds that her entry into the fashion world was unexpected but impactful. After the photo session, Nick sits with Harriet and tells her that now that she's famous, everyone will try to get close to her and talk to her. She needs to choose her close circle carefully. He invites her to a party in the evening after they finish work. However, Harriet has a heavy emotional burden in her close circle that she can't shake off. This becomes evident when her friend Nat calls her, and she ignores the call. With each new dress Harriet wears, her appearance changes, transforming from a mere teenager into a significant model. Her father is surprised when he sees her in a beautiful red dress from Yugi Lee's collection and tells her she looks like her mother. At night, Harriet faces the cameras and lights professionally for the first time, managing to handle the journalists and answer their questions. When Bobby notices that Harriet is stealing the spotlight from her, she suggests to Nick that they get closer to her to distract the journalists. Nick refuses, telling her that he is tired of her behavior and that she doesn't need to stay close to him to ensure her success. She can succeed on her own. Yugi Lee tells Wilbur that she has decided to make Harriet the model for her perfume campaign. Wilbur reminds her that they have a contract with Bobby, but Yugi Lee insists that she wants Harriet and that he must make it happen. At this moment, Harriet decides to escape from the journalists and runs away. Wilbur follows her and asks if she is feeling pressured or stressed. She tells him that it's her first time facing so many journalists, all taking pictures and asking different questions. They all want answers. Wilbur reassures her that she doesn't have to answer all of them, and that the most important thing is to maintain her calm and composure, even if she has to ignore them. Wilbur leaves her, goes to talk to her father, Richard, telling him that his daughter has a bright future ahead. He informs Richard that Yugi Lee has chosen Harriet for the perfume campaign, so he must take good care of her and ensure she has everything she needs to focus on her work. He asks Richard to talk to her and let her express all her thoughts and concerns. As a result, Richard agrees to let Harriet stay out with Nick Park, but he asks her to be back by 11:30 p.m. and asks Nick to take care of his daughter. Nick spends the night talking to Harriet while the press takes photos, which are published on many sites. The next morning, Nat sees a picture of Harriet with Nick at the Canadian Museum and realizes that Harriet lied to her, got accepted into the modeling auditions that Nat herself failed. When they return to London, the girls recognize Nick Park at the airport. They run up to him and ask to take pictures with him. They also recognize Harriet and call her the museum girl who loves Nick. Noticing that they are delaying them, Wilbur distracts them by pretending that a famous singer is nearby, even calling out to greet him. The girls are easily fooled and run towards the place Wilbur points out. At the Infinity headquarters, Judd tells Wilbur that Harriet has been a tremendous success. Wilbur confidently responds that he expected this from the moment he first saw her. Judd says they need to quickly prepare her for the perfume photo shoot for Yugi Lee. Wilbur promises to arrange everything for the session himself. Meanwhile, Harriet and her father, Richard, return home. They are surprised to find Annabelle waiting for them. Annabelle asks Harriet about her work in Canada. Harriet gets nervous, thinking Annabelle is angry. But Annabelle surprises her by saying she is proud of her and has been following her successes. She apologizes for underestimating her and thinking she wouldn't succeed, then hugs and congratulates her. In her room, Harriet receives a new message from Nick Park, who says he wants to go out with her again. Harriet understands this as a date and jumps up with joy, replying that she agrees. The next morning, Harriet tries to repair her relationship with her friend Nat. She goes to Nat's house to pick her up for school, but her mother says Nat went to school alone. At school, the students who used to mock Harriet try to get close to her now that she is famous. The first two to do this are Ollie and Liv, Lexi's friends who used to bully Harriet. Even Lexi flatters Harriet, praising her beauty and telling her how gorgeous her hair looks. At that moment, Nat appears, and Harriet runs to her and tries to apologize. Nat tells her that she's fine and doesn't want any apologies. She asks Harriet to stay away from her, just as she distanced herself and hid her modeling success. She then leaves, saying she has a meeting with Miss Lord. Meanwhile, Richard is with Annabelle, trying to apologize to her. Annabelle tells him that he lied and traveled to Canada with Harriet without her knowledge. She also mentions that he signed papers obligating Harriet to do the perfume campaign photo shoot for Yugi Lee tomorrow, meaning Harriet will miss school. Annabelle advises him to have a lawyer present when signing any contracts or agreements, or at the very least, to read the documents himself, given his role as Harriet's legal guardian. When we return to the school, we find Harriet still trying to make amends with Nat. She offers to help her with her project, and eventually Nat accepts after initially refusing several times. After the school day ends, Harriet is surprised to see Nick waiting for her in his car outside the school. She hears the excited screams of the fangirls and realizes how lucky she is that he chose to go out with her. Noticing Harriet's nervousness, Nick asks her why she feels that way. She tells him it's her first time going on a date. He suggests they take things easy and treat it like a casual outing to help her relax. He then starts unpacking the food he brought with him. him. Meanwhile, Harriet reads a comment on Instagram that upsets her. The comment says that Nick's ex-girlfriend, Bobby, is prettier than her, that they can't even be compared. Suddenly, Harriet remembers her appointment with Nat, realizes she promised to help her with the project. She asks Nick to take her to Nat, but Nick's car breaks down, causing her to be late. When she finally reaches Nat, Nat tells her she is incredibly selfish for choosing Nick over her and walks away. At that moment, Wilbur calls Harriet for the perfume campaign photo shoot for Yugi Lee. However, she feels down and unsure of what to do, especially since her relationship with her closest friend has deteriorated. The next day, Bobby tries to gain sympathy from her followers by taking a photo with the juice she used to drink with Nick in the old days. She tells her followers that she and Nick have separated. Each of them is now on their own path in life. At the same time, Wilbur is waiting for Harriet to leave the house. Richard tells Annabelle that their daughter came home late and stayed up listening to sad songs, suspecting it might be a boy-related issue. When Harriet comes out, she asks Wilbur to stop by her school to pick up something. Despite knowing they are already 47 minutes late, Wilbur reluctantly agrees. At school, Harriet tries to talk to Nat, but Nat shuts her down and tells her she doesn't want to talk to her or receive any more calls. Lexi tells Harriet that she saw Bobby's video after her breakup with Nick Park and assures her that she is not to blame for the breakup. She explains that love is beyond control. Harriet watches Bobby's video in the car. When Harriet and Wilbur arrive at the Infinity headquarters, Wilbur instructs his assistants to take care of Richard and Annabelle until the photo session is over. Meanwhile, Bobby accuses Nick Park of being the reason Harriet took the perfume campaign from her. She tells him he did it because he loves Harriet and because Yugi Lee, being his aunt, is easy for him to manipulate. As Harriet prepares for the perfume campaign makeup, she sends a message to her friend Nat, saying she will give her space to cool down but won't give up on her or their friendship, as Nat is her most important friend. While Harriet is on Instagram, Betty sees her and tells her she prefers her with Nick over Bobby because Bobby is arrogant and doesn't appreciate those who work with her. At that moment, Yugi Lee arrives and asks Betty about Judd. Betty informs her that Judd is not at the company right now, but will be back soon, suggesting Yugi Lee can wait for her return. Harriet and Nick start filming the commercial. Harriet sits in a bathtub filled with flowers, with Nick sitting beside the tub. During this time, Richard is watching the shoot and describing to his wife Annabelle how much the commercial embodies the spirit of nature and is closely connected to it. Hearing this, Yugi Lee approaches him and Annabelle and tells him that his analysis is correct. She lets him smell the perfume being promoted in the commercial, and he comments that it indeed has a natural and blended fragrance. Wilbur then interjects, explaining to Yugi Lee that Richard and Annabelle are observing the shoot as part of their guardianship duties towards Harriet. At that moment, the director calls for a break. Nick starts playing with Harriet, throwing flower petals at each other. Yugi Lee sees this and says that this spontaneous performance is exactly what she needs for her commercial. Consequently, the director orders the cameraman to start filming. Meanwhile, Bobby watches the shoot from a distance, feeling envious. After the shoot, she goes to Harriet and congratulates her insincerely. Harriet seizes the opportunity to ask Bobby about her relationship with Nick. Bobby admits that it was just a superficial relationship for the audience and that she orchestrated it from start to finish. Harriet then films with a new model named Ren. At the end of the commercial, she kisses him goodbye. Bobby takes advantage of this moment, photographs it, and posts it on social media. When Wilbur sees the photo, he curses Bobby, saying he thought she was the beauty, but she turned out to be the beast. When Harriet checks her phone and sees the photo, she becomes furious. She channels her anger into her performance in the rest of the campaign ads. Her genuine and realistic acting impresses both the director and Yugi Lee. Harriet then goes live to her audience, explaining that Bobby exploited the perfume commercial shoot to post a misleading picture, distorting the truth. She clarifies that she is there to work on a new perfume ad campaign, not to fall in love or form relationships. She also apologizes to Nat, calling her her closest friend and saying she never intended to hurt or upset her. Of course, this live broadcast is used against the ad campaign, with news sites reporting that details of the campaign were leaked. When Yugi Lee learns about this, she blames Wilbur. Wilbur then goes to Harriet and asks her what exactly she did. The next day, Judd tries to call Yugi Lee, but she doesn't answer. This makes Judd anxious and worried about her profits from Yugi Lee's use of her models, especially considering Harriet is the most important one. Wilbur tells her that Yugi Lee will never work with them again because of the disaster Harriet caused. Judd says she won't allow Harriet to ruin their company's reputation and harm them. When Wilbur tries to defend Harriet, Judd calls her a naive girl who ruined an entire ad campaign with one silly post. At the same time, Harriet surprises Richard and Annabelle by saying she's going to school and has quit Infinity. Annabelle is shocked by this decision and tells her it was an opportunity no girl her age could dream of. But Harriet says she wants to become a paleontologist, not a superficial model. As soon as Harriet enters the school, she goes to Nat and apologizes again. When Nat tries to respond, Harriet asks her to be quiet and listen. She shows her a picture from her 5th birthday, where they are together in the photo, and reminds her that Nat was her only guest at the party. She then shows her another picture from their first day of high school, reminding her that she used to write notes in all her books and notebooks to always remember her. She tells Nat she has hundreds of photos of them together. Could tell her many stories about their friendship. Harriet promises not to be selfish anymore and to always be loyal to her. Nat forgives her and hugs her. In the end, Harriet tells Nat she resigned from Infinity. Nat is surprised by this sudden decision. Harriet explains that working in fashion and modeling only brought her problems and reminds Nat that she almost lost her because of it. Meanwhile, Wilbur meets Nick at the airport and informs him that Harriet quit Infinity due to the leak of the ad campaign details. Nick promises to talk to his aunt and try to resolve the issue. However, when he tries to call her, she doesn't answer. Nick then calls Harriet, but she doesn't answer either. Wilbur asks him to keep trying while he tries to calm Judd down. Suddenly, Nick decides to go to Harriet's school. There, he asks her to reconsider her decision to resign from Infinity. He tells her that since she found a job she loves, she must fight to stay in it. He shows her the photo he took of her when he was teaching her how to be a model and asks her to think twice, 3 times, before leaving the career she loved and succeeded in. After thinking it over, Harriet calls Judd and tells her that she doesn't want to give up. She asks to come back to work. At that moment, Julian, the school principal, announces for the students to go to the talent show hall. They head there immediately to watch their classmates' talents. Meanwhile, Wilbur talks to Judd, telling her that Harriet will be back to model Yugi Lee's collection tomorrow. Judd responds that this is a multi-million-dollar job and there's no way she can trust a schoolgirl like Harriet again. She informs him that Bobby will be presenting the collection instead. Wilbur threatens to resign if anyone other than Harriet gets the job and says he'll take Nick Park with him when he leaves the company. Judd becomes furious, following him and calling out, but he keeps walking and ignores her. Back at the school, Toby is showcasing his talent by performing a scene from the story of King Arthur on stage. His presence and talent captivate the audience. Betty calls Nick and informs him that Wilbur has also resigned from Infinity. She asks him to intervene and stop what's happening because Judd plans to give Yugi Lee's show to Bobby. At school, Harriet discovers that Lexi, Ollie, and Liv are performing a song on stage filled with bullying and insults aimed at her. She feels upset and unsure of what to do. Suddenly, a crazy idea strikes her when she sees a bucket full of paint in front of her. She grabs it and dumps it over Lexi and her friends, finally getting her revenge. Nat congratulates her on her bravery. At that moment, Harriet receives a voice message from Judd telling her she can't return to work because Bobby has taken her place in Yugi Lee's show. Accepting reality, Harriet returns to her normal life, decides to hold on to the things she loves, regardless of fame. She prepares to go to school, taking her old bag with her and leaving behind the fancy new bag she bought after becoming famous. Meanwhile, Nick enters his apartment and is surprised to find Wilbur inside. He reacts angrily, asking how Wilbur got in without his permission. Wilbur sarcastically tells him to get him fired from his job, evicted from his apartment, and banished from everywhere in the world. He asks Nick to help ensure that Harriet presents Yugi Lee's collection, but Nick tells him that Yugi Lee replaced Harriet with Bobby after what happened with the perfume campaign. Wilbur asks him to go to his aunt Yugi Lee and convince her to reinstate Harriet in her rightful place, and he will ensure that Harriet attends and presents the show. When Harriet enters the school, she discovers all the students looking at her and smiling. Lexi is forced to stand in front of her and apologize. Nat tells Harriet that Lexi has bullied many students. She was the only one who dared to stand up to her, put her in her place, and made her apologize. Meanwhile, Nick goes to his aunt Yugi Lee's house and tells her that Harriet needs to return to model her collection. She replies that she runs a multi-million-dollar business with investors who would never agree to take Harriet back, especially after she ruined an entire ad campaign. Nick argues that Harriet's mistake gave them free publicity. Yugi Lee responds that she doesn't want her brand's publicity to be associated with disasters and advises Nick to go home, rest, and reconsider before getting involved in another mess with Harriet. At that moment, Nick sends a message to Harriet, asking her to call Wilbur and talk to him. However, Miss Lord sees her phone, takes it away, and tells her she will return it after the school day ends. When Harriet gets home, she finds Wilbur waiting for her. He asks if she's ready to dazzle the world and tells her she will be presenting Yugi Lee's show, promises to do whatever it takes to ensure no one stands in their way. He asks her to wear a special dress and accompany him to the show venue. She goes to her room, puts on the dress, and heads to the venue with him. Before they arrive, Bobby and Nick are already there. Nick is still distracted and wants Harriet to present the show instead of Bobby. Noticing this, Bobby advises him to live in reality and forget his dreams because they won't come true. When Harriet and Wilbur arrive, Nick hears the audience chanting Harriet's name. Yugi Lee watches her on the television as she enters the venue. When Judd greets her, Harriet boldly tells her that they both don't like each other. She says Judd doesn't believe in her or her abilities, and she understands because she herself wasn't confident in her abilities before. But now she comes with confidence and knows her worth. At that moment, Yugi Lee is watching and listening. She comments that Harriet's words are true, and seeing her in person, agrees to let her present the show. When the show starts, and it's Harriet's turn, she walks in confidently. Suddenly, she hears everyone whispering her school nickname. She doesn't realize there's a piece of paper stuck to her back that says geek, but this time she doesn't get upset or nervous. She tells herself that this label is her identity and she will always be proud of it. When Harriet meets Nick on the runway, she smiles at him. He approaches her and removes the paper from her back, which has Bobby's signature on it. Harriet isn't bothered and tells him that she is unique. She then kisses him in front of the entire audience watching the show. Finally, Yugi Lee decides to release the perfume campaign that was partially leaked by Harriet earlier. When Nick sees it, he hugs her and tells her that he is proud of her. In the end, we see that Yugi Lee has utilized Harriet's nickname and turned it into a new brand.